Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And this podcast is being recorded on the land of the Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga people. It's important to me that I continue to learn about this land, the First Nations people who cared for it for so long, and also the history and culture of my immigrant and settler ancestors. So if you are new here and wondering who I am and what this podcast is all about, let me tell you, I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, mom, entrepreneur, and someone who really loves to continue to learn and ask questions. And I feel like that's why podcasting gets me excited. I feel like that's why it's a good fit for me. I get to ask questions about yoga and running a business and all kinds of fascinating topics each and every week. And I get to learn with you. So I'm really excited that you're here and that we get to dive in and be in community and learn together. I also work as the founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. This is a place where movement educators and healthcare professionals collaborate and learn the most up-to-date information regarding pelvic health. If you want to check that out, visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com. If you'd like to join us, I'll talk about some events that we have coming up, some live things. And I also want to say that if you're a yoga teacher or if you're a yoga practitioner, there's a huge yoga focus over in Pelvic Health Professionals because I really love to see how yoga can benefit our pelvic health. Everything from how the down regulation of the nervous system to how we move and breathe can really benefit our pelvic health. So to check that out, visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com. This podcast today, but overall the entire podcast was made for you, the yoga teacher, because I get how it feels to be out in the real world as a new business owner and as a yoga teacher. When I came out of my first 200-hour yoga teacher training, I really craved being back in community, being back in a place where I was continuing to learn with a group of people. And I felt like I was kind of left out in the wilderness. And I would have loved a podcast that helped me stay connected to that information while I could listen and do other things like drive or clean or garden or, do all the things that we're doing out in the world. I don't even think podcasts existed. No, they did not when I became a yoga teacher. But I'm glad that it's here for you, and I'm glad that we get to hang out together. Today's episode is powered by OfferingTree. I use and love this software in my own business because it automates everything from bookings to payments, Zoom links, reminders, and so much more. And we have a special discount for you because you're a podcast listener. Head on over to offeringtree.com/Shannon to check that out. This week on the podcast, we are digging into something that I think many listeners will be able to relate to, the yoga of parenting. If you've ever, been the supporter of parents, or if you've been a parent yourself, you know that it can be really challenging. As a mom of 3, I've definitely had moments where I've lost my temper or said or did something that wasn't the quote unquote right thing. And in those moments, as my kids got older, I could go back and let my kids know, hey, I'm doing my best here and it's not perfect and we're in this mess together. And I really have said over the years that my children are my biggest teachers. I'm also really grateful for my yoga practice, for my parenting days. So I found yoga and took my yoga teacher training when Sage was a baby, so 18 years ago. And during the years of parenting and facing challenges, many challenges with kids, but also just facing the changes of raising kids. 2 of my kids have moved out and all of the things and all of the stages that go along with parenting, yoga has really helped me to stay grounded with who I am, connecting back to that, and then also enabling me to show up in the best way possible, to bring a little more calm into my life or a little more connection to me so that I can really be there for my kids. And I want to highlight again that I am not doing this perfectly. I'm not some perfect parent. And that's why I'm so excited that I got to talk with Sarah Ezrin, who is also very open about not being a perfect parent. Sarah is the author of the Yoga of Parenting book. And when she reached out to me to be a guest on the podcast, I was just super excited that we could talk about this. Sarah Ezrin is an author, freelance writer, yoga educator, and content creator who's based in the Bay Area. She writes extensively on the subjects of yoga, parenting, and mental health, and she often interweaves these themes. And she's a regular contributor for publications like Yoga Journal, Yoga International, Healthline, Scary Mommy, and more. Her new book just came out. It's called The Yoga of Parenting, 10 yoga-based practices to help you stay grounded, connect with your kids, and be kind to yourself. In our conversation today, you're going to hear Sarah talk about her big why for getting out of bed in the morning. And I'll just give you a hint. It's not that her kids are like standing at the side of the bed waking her up. Not all of the time. She also shares about the 2 articles that really resonated with people over the years and how her book is different from other parenting books. Because some parenting books can just add to the overwhelm. Sarah's isn't about that. She talks about being present as a parent and not feeling guilty when we aren't present. How to deal with parenting advice. Her and I both talk about that. I share a personal story of when I got some pretty harsh parenting advice. And Sarah shares tips from her books about the yoga of parenting. So whether you are currently right in the thick of parenting right now, as a new parent or as a parent for years, or maybe you're supporting parents in your yoga classes, or maybe you've even, gone past the active parenting stage where kids are living at home with you, but we're still always parents. No matter where you are in this conversation has a lot of gems that I cannot wait to share with you. So let's dive in and meet Sarah and talk about the yoga of parenting. Connected Yoga Teachers, I'm really excited to tell you about a special book draw so that you can win one of Sarah's books, or at least enter in the draw to win one. It's called The Yoga of Parenting. Here's where Sarah and I were talking about it, and I just wanted to put it at the beginning of the episode so that you can remember to head on over to our show notes page. theconnectedyogateacher.com/342 is where you find that. Or if you forget the number, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com, go to the search bar and type parenting and you'll find it. Enter the draw to win the book. Connected Yoga Teachers, I also am excited to share with you that Sarah is doing a book giveaway. So if you comment like one thing that you learned from this episode, or maybe it's one thing that you've learned through parenting, one thing that you'd like to share with other people that worked for you, you can post in the comments. We'll do a draw for one book and let you know, and then the book will be shipped to you. Thank you so much for doing that, Sarah.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to read all the responses. That's the best part.
It is. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Sarah. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm very excited to get to talk to you.
I'm really excited that we get to dive into your book, The Yoga of Parenting, and really talk about like what that looks like on the ground as a parent to bring these 2 things together. Before we do that, can you tell our listeners what's the work that you do and who do you do it for?
I mean, my why, it's so interesting because it changes, right? Like, and I have to be honest that some of my work I do for myself because it's just fulfills me and it fills my tank. And as a mom, I think that's really important to have that. I have a dog walking around. I do it for him too, definitely. But, I mostly do it. I mean, who gets me out of bed every morning? And I'm not going to say my kids, so please don't. The other parents may get upset. And again, I do a lot for them, but what really gets me out of bed are the people that feel seen and heard by my work. The people who are going through whatever it may be, whether it's when I address parenting challenges or mental health issues, or struggling yoga teachers. And if I write something where they feel seen and not as alone as perhaps they went to bed the morning, the evening before, that's who I'm doing it all for. So there's a little bit of like fulfilling my dharma and filling my tank and maintaining my whole self as Sarah. But ultimately, it's because I love helping people, and not helping like in a grandiose way, like I'm doing anything, because I think we all help ourselves, but it's just to be that container, because there's just so many things that we go through this life and we feel so alone. And if I can be a voice of truth and reason and, just like no filter, but also in a way that people see themselves, then, I've done my job.
Can you think of an article that you wrote or some content that you created that really landed with people where people were saying, like, oh my gosh, I feel seen, I feel supported by this? Is there something that comes to mind?
I mean, I've had a couple that were bursts, right? Where, it was like, and I don't even want to use the word viral because I feel like that downplays it, but where a number of people reached out from all walks of life. Like, it's one thing to write a yoga article and have all the yoga teachers respond, right? And it's one thing to write a parenting article and have all the parenting teachers respond. But I did write a piece about anxiety on Mind Body Green in 2017, about anxiety being a third person in our marriage with my husband, and almost treating anxiety like a guest in our home. And that is how I've learned to live with my anxiety. And that really resonated with people from all walks of my life, my high school friends to yoga students and other yoga teachers, people in the wellness world. It's carried through years later. And I think what made it so relatable was just putting, my favorite thing to do is to put words to the common experience. So, whether it's like metaphor or just a general description, it's like, we sometimes are feeling these things and we just can't put words on it. And I don't know if you've read Brene Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart, but that's, she talks so much about the importance of being able to name our emotions, to name what we're feeling and what we're experiencing. And how can we do that if we don't know the difference between, happy and joy and, all those things? And so I try, at least with the experiences I know, because I obviously have only lived my life, is, to really separate out, like, okay, what's fear? What's anxiety? What is eating disorder history coming out? What is, Al-Anon, child of alcoholics? And even though these things seem disparate, how are they all kind of the same thing? How are they presenting as the same experience? And by putting words to it, I think people are just like, that's it. That's what I was feeling. And that's just, it's so relieving for me, because that's how I feel when I read my favorite writers, right? I'm like, that's it. Right?
Yeah.
And that's how I know, like, okay, I'm going to, this is who I'm going to follow and read every day if possible.
I love this. And I think it applies so much to yoga teachers who are listening and thinking, like, what keeps you going? It can be the yoga student who comes up to you at the end of class, like, oh, wow, I really needed this. I haven't felt, this connected to my body or this good, like, all week or something. So this resonates with me because this is why I do the podcast, because I feel like I know what it feels like. I know how isolating it can be as a yoga teacher out in the world. And then I want yoga teachers to feel supported and to find our guests for that. So for our listeners who are possibly also parents, what was the seed of writing this book and connecting yoga to parenting? What kind of started that journey?
Well, I want to go back real quick because it just
Yeah.
made me remember another article that was like great for yoga, because there's so many experiences as a yoga teacher that you think you're alone in. It's like you have a student that is triggering you, or, there's a situation where you're uncomfortable speaking about finances. And, I try to do the same thing in the yoga community too, in my writings. And so the one article that recently got a lot of, people were like, oh yes, me too, it was an embarrassing moments article where all these yoga teachers, like from the senior most teachers to celebrity teachers, like everybody was sharing some embarrassing moment. And yeah, I just think all of it is grounding ourselves back to the human level, and just reminding that we are all in this together. So, I love that we can do that for each other as community, and especially in the yoga world where there can feel like this pressure sometimes to show up and just be calm all the time and not make any mistakes and know your sequence perfectly and have the music curated if you use the music, and that how human yoga teachers are. And that's what planted the seed for the book was, as a yoga teacher, I was still struggling with a lot in my parenting. I just felt there was a lack of parenting books that were normalizing making mistakes. So many of them were behavior based, or, really kind of like punitive, and, just like, you have to do this, you must follow these steps, or you're going to mess your child up. You must say it in this exact way. And like, we know that that's just not feasible in a moment where you're super heightened, right? I mean, especially if anyone studied the nervous system, like I can't remember yes, I can maybe remember to crouch down and get on my toddler's level, but I can't remember to like order what I'm saying and like, okay, validate. And you do get better. And, I do practice, I do think those skills are important, but what was lacking was the human side of it, the book that was like, well, I still mess up and I still do this and I still do that. And I especially couldn't find it from the yogic perspective, because there was a ton of mindful parenting books from the Buddhist perspective that were very open to talking about the human experience and the mistakes and the, monkey mind and all those things. But it wasn't really from our lineage. So that was like, I was just felt this space like, okay, this is the book that I want to create. I want a book that gives people permission to be human, permission to make mistakes, permission to be perfectly imperfect. And let's do this from a yogic lens.
I love that, because as a mom of 3 kids, like I feel like I'm finally starting to realize what parenting is like, and my youngest is 18.
Mm.
I feel like, okay, now I get it way better, and each stage is different. And I remember their grandma coming over, like my mother-in-law saying, I wish you would just take all of these books and like throw them out, because it's too overwhelming for you. Like how to make the perfect baby food, and like look after the environment while also your children and their development, and like are they developing properly, and are you using all the right words that you won't mess them up by the end of by the end of their childhood. And like I learned a lot, but you're right, it can be really overwhelming. And I think exactly that. It's people giving you a ton of advice and not saying like, hey, we're all kind of messing up along the way. I think that's important. So
Yeah.
what are some of the ways that um you think yoga can really help us when we're in those moments as parents, when you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed? You mentioned toddlers. Toddlers are
I have
can
two.
be you have to. Yeah.
We're in
How
it
does
right now.
yoga help in those moments when toddlers are overwhelming?
Toddlers are toddlers. That's just what they do. I mean, there's so many different tools, right? And that's what I love about it, is that it's a whole toolkit. It's not just like there's not one thing that you have to do or one script that you have to read. And the other thing that I wanted to, that as you were talking, that reminded me is, all of us are the best parents for our children. We are the best expert on our child. And even though we do need to go to experts for guidance and a container, and obviously we need experts at times, right? Like, you need to go to the doctor when you're ill. Ultimately, you have the answers inside of you. And that's what I wanted to create, was some way for people to get quiet enough so that when they're reading the book or listening to their in-law or, looking at the parents at that school, that they can get inspired by what other people are doing. Things can seem to make sense and click, but they're not just being influenced to do stuff because someone else is doing it, that they're finding what feels authentic and organic to them and to their children. What's the best fit for you and what's the best fit for your child? And I think breath is going to be your number one, right? But I also have to acknowledge that breath is not a gateway for everybody. For folks that have experienced trauma, breath can be really challenging. So embodiment is another like top tier tool, holds equal footing, particularly like foundational embodiment, like feeling what's on the floor, whether it's your feet or if you're sitting your bum, just so you can use your own body to root and to anchor. I think those are, they seem small and they're hard to remember in the moment. My son was just losing it this morning because he really wanted a protein bar on the way to school. And I'm like, I'm driving. I've got the baby crying too. The 15-month-old's also crying. My 3.5-year-old is just losing it. And I noticed, even recalling it, I'm holding my breath. So while driving on the freeway, while, volleying back and forth between these two major emotions, I took a huge breath. I even felt my bum in the car, even while it was moving. And that was just really helpful at getting me to a place of presence, right? Where I wasn't like leaping forward to worrying about what he was going to be feeling later in the day, or, does my other son need me? And all the split that the split attention that tends to happen when you're a parent and a householder and living of this world. So I
Yeah.
think those are some of the, best tools that our yoga practices can give us.
I feel like toddlers and teenagers were the most challenging times for myself as a parent. I think I hear that from a lot of parents, although I do think people stop talking about teenagers. We know they're like making their own way. They're kind of pushing away from us. They're sort of being their own, they have their own rebellious moments. And I think the same things apply, when your teenager kind of lashes out at you because you're the safe person, find your breath, find your sits bones or whatever in that moment of like ground your feet on the floor and just it might look very different from like a toddler temper tantrum over a protein bar, but there's a lot of emotion.
We have temper tantrums as adults,
Yeah.
I mean, even the senior most yoga teachers have moments of dysregulation, and we've all had that moment of like, whether it's like you're stuck in traffic or, something happens at work or, you're rushing for something. We all have those moments. It's just with the toddlers and with the teenagers, there's a little bit, the emotional regulation side of it is, still developing, but that's why they call it a three-nager too, right? Like 3-year-olds I mean, it's incredible how much he is like a surly teenage boy sometimes. I'm like, you want a hug? No. Okay. And then 10 seconds later, he's like, I love you, mama. Like, okay.
Yeah. I also love how you said that we're all the experts for our children. I think that's super powerful when you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. You really get to know as a parent what that child needs, like through the thick of it. And you're there as their advocate. Like you said, you can reach out to experts, but really, watching my kids grow up and having 3, they're so different. And I feel like I parented them the same way, but they all need different things. So that's great. That's a great tip as well. How did you decide to put the book together, and how do you hope that people use it?
Well, I knew that I wanted there to be a structure to it. I mean, there was twofold. The first was that I wanted a bedside table companion. I wanted a book that people could flip through, and so it wasn't linear. They didn't have to read it from start to finish. But if someone chose to read it from start to finish, I did want there to be a natural arc in it. Just like there is in a yoga class where you start off in a grounding shape, you get into your body, you get present, and then you start to warm up and you're building up, and then the poses get a little bit more intense and more heat building, and maybe it's the more challenging postures. And then you start to come down the other side of the mountain, which is just as important, where it's much more introspective, much slower pacing, as you work your way towards Shavasana. That was really important, was to have the book create that kind of arc. But I also, somebody said, "Oh, I'm using your book like a tarot card deck." They're just like flipping through and finding the lessons that work for them. So I don't ever want to limit someone in how I think they should use it. I think they could use it however they want. It is intentional, but you can also do it from the beginning, the end to the beginning, or jump in the middle, and wherever you need to go with it. It's I'm a big believer in like letting the book choose. I love flipping through and then finding a page. It always seems to pick the right thing. And even because I've been doing readings lately on IG Live, because we're still in like the early weeks of promoting, and I have the book pick. And there's many times, I'll be fully honest, where I'm like, I don't want to read this. Like, this is not, why am I reading this? But I read it because the book picked it. And then as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh my goodness, like I needed this today. Right. Like, it makes sense that I got this. It's like, it seemed like it was just totally out of left field. But as I read it, I'm like, oh no, this is what we needed on, Wednesday, June 28th. Right. It's kind of cool that way.
Oh, that's neat. Connected yoga teachers, I'm popping in here for a moment because I want to tell you about the software that I use and love. It saves me not only time, but also headaches and money. If you are a busy yoga teacher with the full calendar and you're looking for a way to share online videos, create a website, book students in, take online payments, send out automatic emails with the correct Zoom link and the correct time zone, make sure to check out OfferingTree. It does all of this. It's an all-in-one software. It's seriously the best one that I know of for yoga teachers and studios. It's very reasonably priced as well. It's the most reasonably priced for what it offers. And the best news is that because you're a podcast listener, we have a discount code for you. That's over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. I'll put a link as well in our show notes. Now let's get back to our conversation with Sarah. Was there any spot in the book where you're like, oh my gosh, this is so difficult to write, or like a lot of emotion came up at that spot of the book?
That's a great question. Two different answers. So the one that was really hard to write for me, the chapter that was really challenging, was the chapter on tapas, which is interesting because it's the middle of the book. So I remember we talking about like the arc of it. And it is one of those moments of, there's many differing views on it. I go through these rabbit holes of like, I go down one lineage. I was raised in the Yoga Sutras, as most of us were in the 200 hour. But then I start reading all this tantric lineage. And then I talk to tantrikas that are like, that's not what tapa, and everybody's like telling me something different, but then it all comes back to the same thing. So I was very overwhelmed with that one. And I think I wrote and rewrote it like 10 times before. I mean, the whole book was rewritten many times, but that particular chapter was a beast to get through. And even the story that I told, the interview that I had to do, but it's the swiftest and like in a really good way and the most authentic now when I read it. And I somehow I cracked the code on how to be like, this is what some people think and this is what other people think. And I think that was what helped it be authentic, was I just stopped trying to claim like I knew what I was talking about, and I was like, well, I don't know, I'm still learning. This is what this person says and this is what this person says, and you figure it out for yourself. And I think what we came to, so here's the thing with tapas, right? So tapas directly translates to heat, and we will often hear it used in the context of transformation, and especially like the element of fire and the idea that you're going through something challenging and it transforms you. But where different lineages think different things is there's the idea of transformation as alchemy and changing the actual structure of what something is, making you something different. And then there's the idea of the transformation through fire, of it really just being a purification and the becoming who you actually are. So we hear about the diamond all the time, right? We hear about the diamond being created, that beautiful, from all the carbon atoms and the heat and whatever. But that's like, it's becoming something, right? Versus the purification aspect of it, which is almost a little more caterpillar to butterfly in my eyes, where it's like, you have to go through the goo to become what you ultimately are meant to be. Or maybe that's what I don't know, you tell me what you think, because maybe that's the atoms are meant to be diamonds, eventually. Like, who am I to say what the universe's plan is? But yeah, I'm curious. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts on tapas?
Well, I think this is a great discussion, and you could convince me of either one, and I like them both. So I'm glad that you included them both in there. I love though, what I'm really stuck on is that you hit this in the very middle of the book. Like, it's not easy to write a book, especially a book about parenting. Like, were you ever thinking, oh my gosh, how can I write this book? Like, how can I keep going on this? Were there moments where you thought, this is an overwhelming topic? Like, two huge topics. Yoga philosophy is huge. You could study it your entire life. You could also study parenting. And really, I think both of them, you're just left with more questions.
Yeah.
Personally, that's what I think.
Yeah, I 1000% agree. And in the beginning, I mean, what I thought the book was going to be was overwhelming. When I started to write it, and I was like, oh my gosh, do I have to write a whole history of yoga? All these other books that I've read, like my friend Mel Salvatore August wrote a book, Yoga to Support Immunity, and she had like a little breakdown of the history of yoga in the beginning. And I was like, oh my, do I have to do that too? And then I spoke with somebody that was raised in Sanatana Dharma, and she's like, no, we don't need a white woman giving us the history. She's like, just keep it with parenting. And it was the best advice, because it really freed me up from having to be the expert. I never ever thought I was the expert, right? But I thought I had to show up as one, at least in the yoga space. I knew with the parenting stuff, I would be citing a bunch of sources and going to the research and interviewing other parents. But with the yoga stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm showing up in my community, having written a book with the term yoga in the title. I have to know it all. And her name's Anusha Wijaykuma, and she gave me so much freedom to just be like, no, like, this is what I know. Here's some texts that back it up. And once I remembered that part of it, it reminded me a lot of when I taught my very first teacher training. And when I taught my first 200 hour, where I thought I had to teach them everything in the first, and know everything and know every answer. And I was such a know-it-all. And it's so funny, like, who I was 5 years into my teaching, versus who I am now, 15 years into my teaching. And I did lead my first training at 5 years, which, like, now I'm like, what? Like, who gave me a training? But I thought I had to know it all, and I thought they had to know it all. And it was just so much pressure on all of us, and like, I read every book, and the amount of preparation that went into it. I mean, it's cool because it paid off in the end. But now when I lead teacher trainings, the very first thing I say when I walk in the room is, I'm going to teach you 3 powerful words. I don't know. And we can rest on that. Make everything an inquiry. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't know what works for Shannon. I don't know what works for, my neighbor next door. I don't know what works in this person's body. We can give each other suggestions, but ultimately only you know. So how can I format that now into like book form? And that, I just like kept it super real, and I made as much of it inquiry as possible. So I didn't have to know, because I don't know, I do not know. And the more I think I know, the less I know, and the less I need to know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that so much, that's what you gift to your students now. And that just seems like that's the best gift as parents as well. Like, I'm not really sure what I'm doing here. Are there any things that you learned while writing this book where you're like, this has really impacted how I parent now in a positive way?
Honestly, it was, talking to senior teachers, people who have 18-year-olds, people who have 40-year-olds, and realizing, oh, I'm not as lost on this path as I thought I was. And again, like my kids are obviously much younger, but like what my gut was telling me, it all goes back to the gut of it, right? The gut instinct of what you need and what your child needs. And I realized like, oh, I'm not that far off the mark. And because I don't know if you know this, and I'm very open about it in interviews, but like I didn't really want to have kids. Like it was not high on my list. I was like, I don't think so. I think I'll stick with dogs and teaching. And of course, the minute I became pregnant the first time, and we had a miscarriage, but the minute that happened, everything changed. And now I know motherhood is deeply interwoven into my dharma and an enormous part of what I do. And I love and live for these little guys. But yeah, I mean, it's such a wild ride. The whole thing is such a wild ride, and it's yeah.
I love that you interviewed people and then you're like, okay, I'm doing okay. Because as parents, we can also get the advice of like, do this, don't do
Yes.
this. I mean, when my daughter was born, she was born 3 months early and she was 2 pounds, 11 ounces. My boys were huge. So it was a real difference. And they finally sent us home from the hospital when she was just under 5 pounds. And she's already like a month and a half old or something. And to me, it seemed I was really comfortable with her care. And I took her out to the store because I finally had her oxygen tubes off because she came like we had a long journey. And this woman came up to me and she goes, "That baby is way too small to have at this store." I was like, "This baby is a month and a half old and I know what I'm doing."
Yeah.
But I was the mom of 3. If that would have been my first, that could have really impacted me. So what would you say to those people who are receiving lots of advice about parenting? And, how can we how do we deal with that when someone's coming at us where we maybe do doubt how we're parenting our kids?
Well, first, what a remarkable story. And how old is your daughter now?
Now she's 18. She's the
That's
baby.
so cool. So she's the baby and she's 18. That's amazing. And the other part that was really cool about the story is, sometimes when people say something to us in early motherhood, you're like, what? I don't know. Like, what did I do? And, we'll get to like what my suggestions are. I'll just remember like my mother-in-law saying something, and I have a great relationship with my mother-in-law. I love her dearly, but I remember her saying, oh, like the magic boob, right? Like, a mommy can make it better. But I had so many challenges with my son. Like, and that was a positive thing. She wasn't trying to be like offensive, but it really triggered me because we had so many breastfeeding challenges that I was like, I'm a failure, it just sent me in the other direction. But now, and what you just reflected is like, but now if someone says something like that, like, I don't know, even if it wasn't, you stand in your power in a different way when you have been through those struggles. And there's nothing that I can say to someone that's going to shore them up and protect them. As because you went through it, it's like you have to go through all your own stuff in order to be able to do that. I do think that we have every right to take a breath and say, that's not my choice right now. I do think, you, and if you have a partner, and it's something to do with family, you can be a united front. You can set boundaries. You have every right to do that. At the end of the day, it's about you and your kids and your partner if you have one. But people say really dumb stuff. And I mean, like I still get really triggered. Like I don't even remember what was said. It was like sent like I honestly, it was literally like 2 days ago, and I was so triggered by it. We were at the gym, and I mean, it was something like it goes so fast, or make sure you don't miss it, or it's just like one of those canned things. And I don't know why. Oh, because I was on my phone. That's what it was. And with my toddler, and somebody was like, it was an older person was basically like shaming me, like, well, don't make sure you don't miss it. It's going to be gone in a flash. And I was just like, you don't know, like, I didn't say that out loud, but in my mind, I was like, you don't know how connected I've been in the last few hours. And, but I also realized I'm like, I had enough of a pause thanks to my meditation practice that morning. Because if I hadn't done my meditation practice, maybe I would have said that out loud. But I had enough of a pause to realize I don't think it was personal. Maybe they were lonely. Maybe they were just looking to connect. They saw Jonah. Maybe they thought they were being helpful. Again, it goes back to that breath and that embodiment. And, you have every right to stand up for yourself if something feels like a boundary is crossed. But the other part is just letting the water roll off the duck's back and just being like, okay, thank you, and knowing that, all right, I'm on my phone right now, but I'm coming back to being fully present with him in 2 minutes, not even. And I've been fully present with him all morning and knowing that. And so, I mean, it's there's a bunch of layers to it. I don't think it's just like a magic thing we can say to others. It's just about the presence of mind to know where they're coming from, to know where we are in that moment.
Yeah. When you said that you had your meditation, I was thinking, okay, what tips do you have for the parent who's feeling like, you know what, I don't have time to meditate or do any kind of yoga. I cannot fit this in. I'm just trying to keep everyone fed and clothed. What would you say to that parent?
Yeah, I mean, it's a luxury to have the days where you have enough time to do more than 15 minutes. And I do want to say that I have the privilege of that. Now, part of how I have that is that I wake up before everybody else out of my own sanity. Like if I don't have that hour and a half, then I'm less effective throughout the day. So what I found was like, I'm introverted. I need the quiet meditation time, much more important than my asana practice, which is what I used to value over everything. I would bend myself over backwards, literally and figuratively, to make my asana practice happen. And now, since becoming a mom, it's the least of my concerns. I still need to move my body, but it's just quiet time in the morning for me. And whether I'm actually like sitting and meditating or I'm just enjoying my tea, that's important. But how I know that I need that is because on the days that I don't get it, on the days that I wake up at the same time that the baby's already screaming and my toddler's already, 0 to 60, that and all day long you feel like you're playing catch up and you can't get ahead of anything, and you're snapping at your friends and you're snapping at your partner if you have one, and all day you're feeling overwhelmed and behind. Well, on the days I started creating a little bit more space in the morning, and I know some people are night owls, so maybe you do it at night, but devoting those 15 minutes or that extra 20 minutes that we all do have, I started to notice more space throughout the day. That it's like it gave me, yes, it was taking away a half an hour of sleep, but it's giving me hours during the day because I'm just so much. And again, nothing, I always want to couch it like I am not perfect, but I'm much more grounded. So, it's like that old parable with the meditator talking to the monk and saying, how long should I meditate? I want to start a practice. And the monk's like, well, you should meditate for, 20 minutes. And the meditator's like, I don't have 20 minutes. And the monk says, then you should do an hour.
Right.
you know?
Right.
I mean, and again, we don't need an hour. We do not need an hour, but just those sneaking in those, and I think we all have 15 minutes before bed. And if it means sacrificing the true crime documentary before bed, and my Netflix is important to me. I get it, but just test it for a week. Give yourself 15 minutes in the morning if you're a morning person, or at night, or maybe middle of the day if that's when someone is napping. 15 minutes to just be in quiet space for you, and see how the day starts to kind of become more spacious, how it almost opens up time for you.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I'm taking a big pause here because I was one of those parents where I was like, I can't fit this in. And then it was, I worked with a coach who helped me fit time in for myself. And she's like, you will just be way better at life and, parenting when you have that time for yourself. Yeah. But it's hard. I
And
know that it's hard when you think,
and the
oh, I
guilt.
can't do it. Yeah.
No. And then the guilt, right? Of when it actually takes you away. Like yesterday morning, I had an opportunity to move my body, and, it was movement practice. And, but it was during breakfast with my youngest or my eldest, but I knew I was going to be with him all afternoon. And I put the baby down, and it was like this like break between 8 to 9. And I was like, okay, my husband's going to do drop off this morning. Can he just do breakfast? Can I go work out? And my toddler was disappointed, but I was like, the door is open. Come hang out with me. I kept reminding myself, I'm like, you're doing pickup today. You're going to be with him from 3 until, he goes to bed at 7:30 or 8. Like, you're going to do drop off the next day. Like, I kept reminding myself that like this 1 hour is it's a fraction. It's a slice. It's like 2% of the entire day. And yes, I'm stepping away from him. But when I hung out with him later in the afternoon, I was a better mom as a result. And he still came and interrupted my workout anyway.
Right.
But at least like he knew, like he was like, can I come dance with you? Like, of course, like I'm not going to say no to that. But I got it in, I got as much as I could in. And I know I like hands down, I was more present with him later that afternoon because I took that time.
Yes. You're bringing to mind this memory. This mom that I know, she worked full time. I worked part time. Like, I was just really lucky that I could do that when I was raising my kids. This mom worked full time, but I was watching her the moment she was done work and she did pick up. She was so present, and that was a big aha moment. Like, it is not the quantity of time, because there are lots of us who were raised like maybe with stay-at-home parents, or even like a generation before where there was a stay-at-home parent, but they were
I don't know. My mom was like smoking in the kitchen, like watching. We had a tiny TV, and she would just be watching the news all day. Like, I don't even know. It's amazing that there was a stay-at-home parent, but there was like zero supervision, like, it's very different.
So it's interesting that we're feeling like this large amount of guilt of like, carving out this time. And I think that's shifted.
Well, the data is also supporting it, right? Like, so
Yeah.
for those of us that are like a little more logical, and, I can sit here and I can tell you what to do, right? And you can even go in and experience it for yourself, and then you still doubt. But I think looking at the data of it, I would love to like put Emily Oster on the case of this, the woman that wrote Crib Sheet. And I like, when you measure quality versus quantity, the connection levels are much deeper. The children's abilities to emotionally regulate, there's actually numerous studies that prove that time and time again. It's just I hate to say it's like a North American ideal of what like a mother should be. I think we have a little more pressure on us as women
Yeah.
to fulfill that. A lot more pressure. And
All the dad has to do is like take the child with them, and people are like, "You're such a good
yes,
dad."
yeah, literally, like if my husband had been on the phone at the gym, that same person would have been like, good for you for bringing, yourself out with your son. Good for you for playing with him. Like, it's incredible, the difference. But, this goes back to the yoga of it all. Like, how are we getting grounded? How are we, other people don't see what goes on behind the curtain. So like, I'm so glad you were able to see, like, this woman works all day, but then you see her being super present. Well, not everybody's going to see both of those sides. They'll see someone working a lot, and then, with their kids, whatever amount of time. Only we know the truth, and we have to stay grounded in that, yes, okay, I work all day long, but it fulfills me and I love what I do. So whenever I'm with my kids, I try, the phone is addicting, but I try to be as fully, wholly present as I absolutely can. And I know I'm a better mom because I work, like, hands down. It's not even a question.
Yeah. I remember like after my third, I was like, I actually can't afford. It just will not pay me to go have my job now with 3 kids and needing daycare. And I was like, oh, I can only do so much of this.
Yeah.
That's when I started a business from home. I was like, 3 kids and a business? Yes, please.
Yes. You're like, let's just make this really hard.
Like you writing a book, like that's another whole baby. So if people are wanting to support a parent and purchase your book, where do they go to buy the book?
So you can get the book anywhere books are sold. If you're in other countries, like I think in certain Canadian bookstores, you may have to ask for it. But I think if you just order it online, then they'll know to order it. But yeah, anywhere books are sold, you can do it through Amazon. Amazon has everything. And what's the even through the Penguin Random House main site, right? Because the Shambhala is an imprint. But I know people prefer paper books and walking into stores. So IndieBound is a cool website for that because you can just punch in your address and then it'll send you to your local bookstores that carry it. But really anywhere, it's the same answer that I have for everything. Like, I don't know, wherever you want to buy it.
Amazing. And then if
But I
people want to
appreciate it.
connect with you, do you
Yeah.
have a website then that they should go to?
I do. Yes. My website is sarahezrinyoga.com. I'm also quite active on the socials. So I always love to hear from people. I try to post everything I write on there and up there. You have access to it through my website too, but it's a wonderful way. People get to meet one another through there too, and how we're building community. I'm on a book tour right now. I don't know when we're going to be airing this, but I'm, all over Northern America right now. And and then that'll probably continue up until the beginning of 2024.
Exciting. I saw your book launch. I think you did an amazing job. This is an amazing book. I'm really
Thank you.
excited. I think that it's needed to kind of bring these concepts together with yoga and parenting. It made a huge difference in not that your book was there for me, but yoga was. And I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to be connected to my body and not have someone clung to me. Like, this is what it feels like to be moving on my own for an hour. So makes a big difference. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for doing this too, because I think sharing all these conversations, sharing in the way that you do, that's what you're creating. You're creating these forums for people to ask themselves the questions that they need to and to find their own inner answers. So thank you for creating that through this podcast.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was really fun to have this conversation with you today about parenting and about yoga and how these things go together and how yoga can help us and how your book can really facilitate some true yoga for parenting. Connected Yoga Teacher listeners, if you're looking for the links for today's episode, you can find all of that over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/342. That's also where you can comment to win one of Sarah's books. So when you comment, you'll automatically be entered into the draw for a book by Sarah, the Yoga of Parenting book. One person will be drawn at the end of the week, and then that person will be sent the book. So you can comment anything. You can share your thoughts on today's episode. You can share a question. You can talk about how yoga has helped you as a parent, or share one of the most challenging things that you faced as a parent. Whatever you'd like to share in there on the show notes page, that's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/342. We would love to hear from you. Also, if you want to hang out in person, we have a really exciting yoga series coming up led by Sarah Garden. It's yoga for endometriosis and pelvic pain. So if you or someone you know is dealing with endometriosis or pelvic pain, or if you are a yoga teacher that supports people with a pelvis, check out this 7-week series. I'm really excited because we get to meet live. But if you can't meet us live, or if you have to miss any of the classes, there are also replays. It starts Thursday, September 21st, so it's coming out very soon. But don't worry, if it's beyond September 21st, 2023, there are replays available. And you get access to those replays for a full year, no matter where you sign up. Visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com, click on yoga, and then look for the Yoga for Endo series with Sarah Garden. Now you can sign up for the entire series and that alone, or if you want to join Pelvic Health Professionals, you'll get access to this series. And then you'll get access to other things as well, and you pay per month and you can cancel at any time, or you can sign up for the whole year if you want to save yourself a little bit of money. We have some really exciting calls coming up over the next few months. So in October, we're going to be talking about diastasis recti. In November, we're going to be talking about stress, the nervous system, and the pelvic floor. December, we're talking about pelvic health and cancer. And then in January, pelvic floor and how that connects to our feet. We have some amazing world-renowned pelvic health experts coming in to talk with us. I'm really excited for the calendar that's coming up. So if you want access to all of that, head over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com and click on the join button. Oh, also, if you're like, I don't want all of that, I only want the 7-week series with Sarah Garden, I have a coupon code for you that will save you $50. Use the code podcast50 at checkout. So you go to pelvichealthprofessionals.com, click on the yoga drop-down menu, look for yoga for endo, and then use the code podcast50 at checkout. If you have any questions at all about the yoga series, or if you have ideas for future podcasts, or if you have thoughts that you want to share with me, you can find me on Instagram at The Connected Yoga Teacher. Send me a message on there. I try and find them all. Or you can email me, Shannon at theconnectedyogateacher.com. Huge thank you to our entire team over here for making today's podcast possible. Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead, this would not even happen without all of you. You're amazing humans, and I'm very honored to be able to get to work with you every week. Thank you for being here, dear listener. You make this podcast really possible for all of us over here. Creating this, it wouldn't be even here if you weren't downloading it, telling people about it, sharing it. So thank you for doing that. And as I sign off and say goodbye here today, I would like to leave you with a question. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?